Welcome. My name is Julie Hyman. I'm an anchor with Yahoo Finance, and you're watching a very special conversation. It's called Building a Just Future, Protecting Health, Safety, and Economic Security. It's streaming on Yahoo Finance as well as justcapital.com, and you will be able to watch this conversation afterwards in both of these places as well. Now, this is first of a series that's been organized by Just Capital and Laurel Strategies, and the goal of this is to talk to leaders to explore how to build a more just and equitable economy after this COVID-19 pandemic that we're all experiencing. In the conversations that I've been having over the past weeks and months, frequently comes back to this question: how do we take this opportunity to build a better world coming out of this? And how do we do that? How is it possible? Again, I'm Julie Hyman. I'm an anchor with Yahoo Finance of On the Move. And in a few moments, I'm going to be joined by Verizon Chairman and CEO Hans Vestberg, as well as Rockefeller Foundation President Shah. First, though, I want to chat a bit with Martin Whittaker. He is the CEO of Just Capital. And for those of you who are not familiar, Just Capital is a nonprofit whose mission it is to build a more just economy in America, an economy that works for everyone. Martin, as I said, we have had a lot of conversations with different folks, including yourself, over the past weeks and months about all of this. And you all developed a COVID tracker to look at corporate responses to this crisis. What has stood out to you, or what has surprised you the most about how businesses have approached this?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to you, Julie, and thank you, Hans and Raj and Alan, for their partnership. We're very excited to do this series, and this event today is super important. I don't think building a more just economy, protecting health, safety, and economic prosperity has ever been more important, not just in this country, but around the world. So we see this, quite honestly, as a crucial moment for Just Capital, for our mission, for the whole movement of trying to create a more stakeholder-based economy. And, what coronavirus has done is sort of shine a very, very sort of white hot spotlight on what that means and put other stakeholders, workers, customers, right into sharp focus in terms of their how crucial they are to the economy. So we feel like this is really a crucial moment, and that a stakeholder-based future is really a must, not a nice to have. So what does that mean? You mentioned the COVID-19 tracker. So the team at Just Capital, as soon as this whole sort of situation began to really accelerate and we realized its full importance, we do what we do best, which is trying to gather data in a structured way across large companies to say, what are they doing right now on many of the issues that are relevant, in particular, in this case, to workers. Also to customers and other stakeholders, but primarily, what are companies doing right now? How are they reacting? And we just began gathering that data as part of our overall mission. And what we found, I guess I'd say a couple of major takeaways. One was it just had tremendous utility in and of itself. The last couple of months have been the most successful in Just Capital's 6-year history in terms of inbound interest, users from business, from investors, from the general public, media. Just getting that data itself had a tremendous amount of value because people could see what others were doing. They could see what best practice looked like. They could share ideas. And so that had a tremendous effect. And really, I think, has accelerated everything that we're trying to do. The second thing I'd say is that the crisis really brought out, I think, the best in business and many organizations. And we'll hear from Hans and Raj about that. But we looked across companies who were just doing amazing things that maybe even they themselves were surprised at what they could do. The adjustments that companies had to make. The tracker tracks the largest 100 employers in America right now. Are expanding that to the largest 300. That'll come out soon. But even within that group, that they employ some 13 million people. the implications of what was happening were just enormous. And so we saw companies in the retail sector raise wages, provide extended paid sick leave, provide hazard pay, executives take compensation cuts. I think that would have been unheard of 6 months ago, and yet you saw companies changing very rapidly in response to this. And I think that's when Alan Fleischmann and I got together and like, okay, there's something really special happening here. We want to capture that. We want those leaders to tell their story. We want to highlight what's really important right now, and then try and help by bringing folks together to say, okay, what comes next? What does the future look like? How do we take some of these amazing things that have happened and make them not just temporary in a crisis, but more the norm now in terms of what we value and how we define success.
I think that's a really good summation of what we're trying to achieve right now. So, Martin, I actually just want to turn it over to Raj and Hans now. Just a few words about them, first of all. Dr. Rajiv Shah is president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and it's interesting that Martin has talked a lot about data because that is really a focus at the foundation: is using data, using innovation, using science as tools to try to improve the world and improve the well-being of humanity around the world. Among the things the foundation's been working on in response to this pandemic, and probably the centerpiece, has been the formulation of a national COVID-19 testing action plan. And there's a working group that's been convened to try to facilitate the exchange of best practices for public health authorities. So really, it's looking at a concrete, actionable plan of how to increase testing, increase it rapidly, increase it dramatically from 1 million a week to 3 million a week, and eventually to 30 million a week, which is going to be really important when it comes to reopening, but also not just about testing, but also about things like food insecurity right now, which we have all seen evidence of around this country. So we're going to talk to Raj much more about that. Hans Vestberg, meanwhile, is the chairman and CEO of Verizon Communications, as I always like to say as my disclaimer. Verizon, which is the parent of Yahoo Finance through its Verizon media arm. And Hans and I have talked in the past actually about the company's commitment to sustainability. We had a lengthy conversation last year about how sustainability is not just something on the side of Verizon. It is core to pretty much everything that the company does in terms of its business practices. It's been, even as an employee, it's been difficult to keep up with all that Verizon has been doing in response to this pandemic, from waiving people's late fees and not suspending their service if they're not able to pay their bills, to the live concert series, which is called Pay It Forward. That's a weekly series that aims to raise money for local businesses. Chance the Rapper will be on tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, and Verizon's donating up to $7.5 million as part of that effort, in addition to trying to get people who are watching to donate. So there's a lot that's been going on between these two, between Rockefeller and Verizon. So let's bring it to this discussion. Raj, I want to start with you. We all came to 2020 thinking it would be a fairly normal year. At what point did you realize that it wasn't going to be a normal year and that you needed to really make some changes and start to address what was going on?
Well, thank you, Julie. Thanks for having me. Glad to be with Alan and Martin, and certainly Hans. Appreciate being with you again in this context. And I love seeing what you're doing as the very effective CEO of Verizon. So appreciate it. I think we looked out on this year, and you're right. I mean, our priorities were basically around distributed renewable energy as a strategy to move 1 billion plus people out of extreme poverty. And around late January, when the World Health Organization designated coronavirus as a public health emergency of international concern, that really started to trigger for us the need to have a pretty profound shift in what we were doing. I had the prior personal experience when I served in the Obama administration of running the West African Ebola response on behalf of the United States. And, the United States deployed nearly 3,000 troops, mobilized extremely incredible amounts of resources from our own nation, but also from more than 40 countries around the world. Ultimately did everything we could to mount an effective response after the summertime urban outbreak of a particular variant of Ebola in 2014. And, in my view, mounted an effective response, ultimately saving thousands of lives, but also preventing Ebola from becoming the kind of crisis that COVID has become inside the United States. So our initial mindset and instinct was about helping countries that seem to be struggling with COVID at a very large or a very high level of prevalence and an increasing incidence. And at that time, that was really China, Southeast Asian nations where we were seeing the spread. And in America, it still was not really thought of as an immediate concern until I'd say maybe early March. In early March, we really put in place a full effort to address COVID-19 here, and the centerpiece of it is a major commitment to transform the way America is conducting testing and contact tracing around the nation, which I can speak to. But I would say, we, like many other institutions, relied on other public health enterprises to sort of sound the alarm, and initially thought of this as an Asia-centric challenge, recognizing it could spread to the United States. But, the Johns Hopkins Global Health Security Index actually indicated that America would be the best prepared country for a pandemic. And when I led the U.S. Agency for International Development, I put in place a project literally called Predict that actually brought scientists and epidemiologists and public health leaders from around the world together to create a monitoring system for zoonotic diseases that have their original reservoir in animals and are likely to transmit to humans. And so, it remains my view that it didn't have to be this bad in the United States. And there were actions that could have been taken in the prior years and in the past few months that could have changed the trajectory here. But right now, it's an all hands on deck effort to address what I think is a crisis that is still underestimated in terms of the transmissibility and the consequence of the health, the virus itself and the health consequences. And in my view, still deeply underestimated in terms of the long-term economic consequences, both at home, but importantly in emerging economies where we predict hundreds of millions of people will be pushed back under the extreme poverty line as a result of this global economic crisis.
That certainly seems true from an economic predictability perspective. I mean, we talk to economists and investors all the time who say that there's just a lot that we don't know right now. Hans, I would ask you as well, what was the kind of moment that crystallized what was happening for you, and then led you to action at Verizon, among other things? You have some new policies around paid sick leave, which we'll delve into in a moment.
We were pretty early on this as we have operation in Asia. We established our emergency operations center already in the beginning or end of January. In February, we went into our sort of new governance model. I think that's what has really changed for us. In the governance models, we have a team taking care of the crisis, which have, I would say, two priorities. One, see that our employees are safe and healthy. And then number two, seeing that our customers can actually use the networks. I understand that the first priority of infrastructure in this country and many places is healthcare, but the second is actually what we are dealing with every day. If we're not connected, people cannot communicate, and now they're in different places and are communicating with different types. So we understood that from the beginning. But it was also very clear, we didn't give up on our plans or something like that. So we continue also to run business as usual. We have not given up on any of our plans for this year, for example. So that we're working as well. And then we have a third way of dealing with it. And that's, of course, looking into what societal changes will happen right now that I need to change products, services, and even how I'm going to operate as a company. So we were very early on splitting up our team, seeing that we're not losing any of the ends. But clearly we understood this from the beginning, and we changed quite a lot, mainly in the operation and governance of the company. And as I said, we have done a lot for our employees in this time. Number one, you start by reassuring them that, hey, you're safe and healthy is the most important for us. And we have never closed. People talk a lot about reopening, but we have 135, 140,000 people. We have 120,000 working from home, but the rest of my employees, they're on the front lines. They are going into hospitals, setting up the broadband, or they are in a store that are deemed essential in order for serve our customers, and they are exposed every day. So the balance of being clear for them, that became important. And what we did very early on, we said that, hey, if there's some time you need to communicate a lot, so we decided that at noon every day, we have a live webcast. We have had that for 10 weeks now, I think. I've been on every one until week 8. Nowadays, I'm 3 times a week because they get tired of me. But basically, half an hour to all our employees talking about what's happening, understanding that we don't have all the answers because we are in such moment. This is totally unprecedented, and your actions need to be unprecedented. So that's what we've done. And usually, a normal day, we have between 25,000 to 65,000 people live looking at noon every day. So that has for us been changes in operations, but not from the plans that we have initially in the year.
Yeah, at a time when there are so many questions, it's good to at least, touch base with people very frequently. Vulnerable communities is something I want to talk about with both of you. And vulnerable communities has a new definition now, right? Because we have so many newly vulnerable communities, people whose businesses are shut, who don't have jobs right now. We have all seen the long lines for food banks around the country. Raj, I know that food insecurity in particular is something that you all are concerned about. How do we solve that issue, and who can help solve that issue? Because it seems it's not as though there's not enough food, it's that it's not getting to the right place.
Yeah, well, I think to understand food security, particularly in America, you have to start with just understanding how vulnerable most American working families are in our modern economy. Before this crisis hit, 40% of American households did not have $400 to protect themselves during and respond to an actual emergency. And that was a statistic, now commonly published and acknowledged, but originally from the Federal Reserve. Perhaps up to 60% of American households were sort of cash flow negative on a month-to-month basis. And over many decades, we've effectively decoupled productivity growth from wage growth in the U.S. economy, and it's led to quite a lot of vulnerability. The result of that is that 30 million American kids depend for their nutrition on the American School Nutrition Program, which provides a lunch in school, but also provides breakfast and often take-home backpacks for meals and nutrition access for their parents and their families. And so right now, a recent survey has found that 17.1% of American kids, and in the greatest country ever in the history of our planet, 17.1% of American kids are going hungry. And it's obviously an unacceptable outcome of this economic crisis. The Rockefeller Foundation has, together with other partners, pulled together businesses and nonprofits and the federal government, and we're working to make sure that we convert the U.S. school feeding program from a school-based services program to something that can directly provide meals to those families in their homes. But that is a major transformation of a very critical part of the American safety net, and it's something we're committed to and are working hard to make happen. But I would just step back for a moment and point out that, the federal government right now has already put approximately $2.9 trillion in as fiscal stimulus into the U.S. economy. And the Fed, of course, has purchased securities worth probably $1 trillion more than that. And the net effect of all that has been we have, in fact, supported broadly the capital markets, but vulnerable American households, the 40% of American households that didn't have the $400, they are really suffering. And whether it's food insecurity, the fear of having to go to an emergency room if they have some immediate symptoms, not knowing where to go for a COVID test, and not really having the security of a proper safety net in the economy is taking its extreme toll, and I think has to be dealt with.
I would add to that the new Fed survey that I believe just came out today that said that just under 40% of people who are living in households with incomes of less than $40,000 reported at least one job loss in that household. So that just talks about the precipice that many of those families are already on, and now they're perhaps being pushed over that precipice by this pandemic. So Raj has talked about the role of the federal government, the role of nonprofits as well. Hans, talking about the role of companies and the corporate world in supporting these vulnerable communities. I mentioned that the Pay It Forward Live series. What are some of the actions that Verizon's been focused on?
I believe long before this crisis started that large corporation has a huge responsibility to serve all their stakeholders and having it part of the strategy. When we started somewhere in the beginning of February, we have a half an hour, 45-minute meeting every morning with the executive team. We outlined two things. I mean, first was that health and safety for employees was number one, and then seeing that the networks are up. That's important. Secondly, what we decided was that we're going to take balanced and decisive decisions that have positive long-term effect for all our stakeholders, employees, for customers, shareholders, and for society. And every time we take decision, we think, are we really doing this right now in that context? And we are actually do the agenda, so we talk about all the four stakeholders in order to see that we're taking balanced decisions. On the society, as I always said, if you have a strategy that society is included, you serve that as a core strategy. So our core strategies are a lot around education, and there we have extended quite a lot when it comes to the support to these schools that we're supporting. We have also increased the content. I mean, we're giving away right now New York Times to all high school students in the country. That's 14 million students that get free access to it. We have also the Pay It Forward, which is for small and medium businesses, which is a big customer group for us. And as you said, we also said from the beginning, this is not a time when you disconnect people because they cannot go anywhere else. I mean, you need to work with them and support them. And we have many of our customers that has come to us and said, hey, due to the COVID-19, I'm financially challenged right now because I've lost my job or other challenges. So we have said that, hey, we work with you. We're not disconnecting you. We're not doing any overhead charges or something like that. So I think you always balance on that. So the list is long what we're doing. We do community. We serve food in New York, Detroit, to all the hospitals because it's part of the customers we're serving. So it's part of our strategy. I don't see this philanthropy. It's part of our strategy, and of course we have been part of supporting WHO when it comes to their setup of their new foundation that it did together with UN Foundation, by the way, where I'm a board member. So I think in general, we're trying to make holistic decisions that is impacting all our four stakeholders and thinking that the decision you take today, you're going to live with them for years. So you better think that are long-term and they should have a positive impact on your four stakeholders.
Hans, speaking of the stakeholders, I want to get to Raj and the testing plan in a minute, but first I want to ask you about reopening because Verizon has started to come out, and as you say, a lot of your folks are on the job. I'm on the job from home, but a lot of the folks at Verizon who work at retail stores, for example, have not been at those retail stores, of course. And you have started to talk about what that reopening will look like. What is it going to look like? What's the most important elements of that for you?
So first of all, as I said, we have 120,000 people working from home. We have also retrained almost 20,000 employees that was doing one task, maybe working in stores. They are doing another task today. So we thought that was a responsibility for us also to see that our employees, even though we made them whole for their compensation, that they come home and they continue to serve our company. We also included what we call nowadays the virtual volunteerism. So if they don't have a job, they can virtually actually support volunteerism that we have set up part of our. So we're trying to do that. But the reopening, I think that first of all, the stores has been open up to 30% all the time. That was the low point. We're now going to 50%. what you do, you change the processes in order to protect your employees and your customers. So it's appointment, it's one person per, you can only serve one customer per one employee, and you don't bring in more than 2-3 people in the store. So you change a lot of processes. You have different opening hours. So it's going to be staggered, and you need to do that in conjunction with both what the legislation is saying and the different municipalities. But obviously, we go for a higher standard here. We want to see that our customers, our employees, are safe and sound. So that's how we think about it. And I said, our field engineers, they have been out there all the time. What they have done, they have innovated. We usually go in and install, for example, broadband in the homes of our employees. Nowadays, we've actually innovated. During these 10 weeks, we've innovated so we can do that installation without going into the homes. And we have also innovated a totally touchless retail store where we don't need to touch anything. The customer doesn't need, we can still serve them. So you start to innovate quite dramatically in this as well. So I'm going to see a staggered, very calm, very structured. And again, we need to reassure our employees safe and health and safety. That's the most important. So we're going to do it staggered, but ultimately people will come back to office. There will be some changes long term for sure, but people or our employees will come back to office, but they will be very staggered model.
Yeah, it is amazing when you talk about a touchless retail store, how important that has become so quickly. One of the other vital components of reopening, whether it's a corporation or a state or an office, whatever it may be, is testing. And that's something that Raj has been really focused on with this testing action plan. So what does it consist of? How is it going to work? And how do you bring the different parties together to get people on the same page? Because that's been one of the things, and I think that's something that we talked about when you came on Yahoo Finance, is that there are so many sort of disparate entities working on this. How do you get them on the same page?
Well, thank you. I do think that testing and contact tracing, which is basically what you do with the data you collect when you have real-time data on who's positive, are the key elements to a data-driven response that has the capacity to support an active economy in the 12 to 18 months that we're going to be waiting for proper therapeutics and certainly a vaccine to not just be discovered, proven, and manufactured, but distributed and deployed at a very high level of efficacy. So, Paul Romer and I did some early work on estimating how much America should be investing in a testing strategy, and determined that our current level of effort in, say, late March was exceedingly low relative to what we need. And even today, if you look around the world, countries that have successfully gotten through phase 1 of the pandemic, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, they test maybe, they get 60, 70, 80 tests per positive identification. In the United States, we do about 5 tests per positive. And what that just means is we're not testing nearly enough. And so the Rockefeller Foundation looked at it. We decided that the best way to be a contributor was to bring together people across different divides. We brought scientists and industry leaders, investors and technologists, and importantly, former administration officials from Democratic and Republican administrations, and said, how can we put together a practical, actionable pathway to increase testing? And what we determined was we could get from the baseline of about 1 million tests a week. This was 2.5 weeks ago. So now we're maybe at 1.6, 1.7 million tests. But we could get from 1 million tests a week to 3 million tests a week in about 8 weeks. And the way to do that was to unlock the molecular testing capacity that exists in research labs, in scientific labs, in university labs that were not being tapped for a variety of reasons, including, in America, what's in network, what's out of network, and what their level of IT connectivity is to the requisition and reporting system. So we thought there were a series of technical proposals we put in front of Congress, in front of governors, and in front of different types of healthcare institutions, including health insurers. And we've seen a number of them be adopted, and now we're seeing a significant increase in the testing. But to get from 3 million tests a week to 30 million tests a week, which I can't emphasize this enough, which is actually what you need if you're going to have much more aggressive testing for asymptomatic people who don't have symptoms, asymptomatic people, so that, you know, a healthcare worker knows they're safe going to the hospital, or an essential worker in a meat packing plant knows that they're safe going to work side by side with their colleagues on the line. And you can't have an economy that's active without it. And in order to get from 3 to 30 million, we actually need new innovations in terms of point of service tests, home kits, and new types of procurement mechanisms that bring together the governors, the states, the cities, and actually place longer term, much larger, and much earlier procurements for these critical health commodities. I'll say this is a strategy we've deployed before on antiretrovirals for HIV/AIDS in Africa under the Bush administration, on vaccines for children around the world for the past 2 decades, pooling demand, you know, working with the supply side of the industry in a cooperative way, determining what products we need, and then placing these long-term advanced procurements with some real credit guarantees backing them. So that's what we're doing right now to help the economy go from 3 to 30 million tests a week. And frankly, it's critical, and I think still underappreciated how important it is, because in mid-August to early September, we'll have a whole nother wave of corona and adenoviruses that represent the next flu season. And most people who have symptoms will have the benign flu. But if there's no way of knowing whether it's COVID-19 or just the new flu season's variants of certain viruses, you know, we're going to be back in the situation of looking at shutting down the economy again in a full lockdown, which causes immense economic loss and immense, as you pointed out, suffering for the vulnerable families that our institution exists to protect and serve.
Raj, as a follow-up to that, do you think that the federal government is there when it comes to now recognizing the importance of testing? And the stakeholders that you talked about getting together were mostly on the sort of state and municipal level. How difficult is it without the federal piece and the federal coordinating, or are they participating more than they have been? I guess the baseline was relatively low.
Well, I think just this past week and late last week, we saw some new announcements from the federal government that imply a much more active approach on expanding testing in our country. And we are 100% supportive of that. The last CARES Act out of Congress actually included $25 billion specifically for testing, including $11 billion for states and localities. So we work with the potential recipients of that $11 billion who want to work with us to say, how do you do that in the most effective, data-driven, and evidence-based way, so that with whatever limited resources you have, we can deploy the testing and the supplies, as well as a workforce of up to 300,000 people, a community health corps that we have called for to help expand the use of contact tracing, which again is very simple in its concept. It's asking people who are positive who they've been around, and then chasing down those folks and getting them tested and repeating the cycle. That's how you stop pandemics. And I can't emphasize this enough. When we went to West Africa to tackle Ebola, you know, we started building Ebola treatment units because people needed to be isolated when they were positive. And we built out thousands of beds. The reality is most went completely unused because we discovered that with effective testing and contact tracing, and we deployed helicopters, US DoD bioterror labs, it got the testing down from 8 or 9 days to get a positive result to under 4 hours. And it transformed the ability to tackle a pandemic. That's the kind of mindset we need in this country and around the world, that we are at war against a virus, and to win it, we actually have to work together, Democratic, Republican, corporate, nonprofit. And those are the kinds of partnerships we've been forging in now more than a dozen states and cities around the country.
Hans, excuse me. I want to get you to weigh in on the corporate side of that. I mean, we've had some actual individual companies saying that they're going to start testing employees. I believe Amazon was one that said it was maybe even going to develop its own tests. What role is Verizon going to have in that? What role do you think corporations need to have in the testing piece?
So first of all, I think the testing has to be governed by CDC and the rules are there, so you are consistent on that. I mean, as a corporation, that's not our expertise, so it has to be very clear in that case. Then I think that testing is, of course, some real-time information. One day you test, the next day you go home from the office, for example, then you need to test every day. So the question is, how can you make this practical? There are other things that is part of the testing, that how you feel, fever and things like that. That's going to be very important to be done as well. So I'm not sure how practical it's going to be that you're going to be tested every day before you go to work. That's going to be very complicated. So I'm with Raj there. We need to find a much wider way to, with several different type of tools in order to see that people feel good about it and going the right way. But again, I think in times like this, you need to listen to the experts on what are really good on that. I hope that people are listening to Verizon when it comes to the best network, how do you work from home, technology changes and all of that. So I think that collaboration has to continue. And of course, we're sitting on a huge employee base. So we're going to listen. We talk to a lot of different constituencies to do the best when we're going to have a staggered back to office, how we're going to do it. But I'm not sure, and I'm not confident enough to say that you can have a testing every day. I just see it very impractical to say.
I want to talk a little bit to some of the other complications of returning to work, whatever that work may be. Beyond just your health and security, there's what else is happening in your life. And I think all of us who are participating today have children, some of whom are at home right now, and all of whom are doing distance learning. But once summer starts, will not be doing the normal activities that kids tend to do in summer. So Hans, from a corporate perspective, what do you do about that? Does that extend the remote learning or the remote working, for example, because you have these additional things to consider that you don't normally have to consider?
Yeah, you're in an unprecedented crisis. Your actions need to be unprecedented. So of course you need to work with your employees. If they cannot come to work because they're a caretaker, or if they need to take care of the children, or their family members that are sick and they need to support them. Of course you need to work with that. It is obvious. So, and we'll do that, and we are doing that. So I think we're going to find those models so we can continue to work. But it's also so that certain employees need to come back to work in order to be there. They might not even have the environment at home that they can work from home all the time. So I think that generalization, how you deal with an organization like ours, 140,000 people, I'm not sure if it's 50 or 100 countries we have employees in, different rules in every. You just need to understand it has to come down to the individual, the employees, and how you help them and reassure that they are doing the best and we can support them to work. And that we will do at Verizon, and we're already doing. So I think generalization is very hard, especially when you have a company of our size. And as I said, we have never closed. I mean, I have 20,000 employees that is out there every day, seeing that the networks are up, or being in the store serving our customers. So for me, this is a balance every day to see how we do this right for our employees with a safe and healthy and keeping the networks up.
Hans, to your point, not everybody can work from home, or even if they have sort of a typical office job, they don't necessarily have the space at home. They don't necessarily have the connection at home. Right. And so obviously being a connectivity expert, that's something that we've been exploring. I mean, I've seen stories of kids who have to sit in a parking lot where there's Wi-Fi in order to be doing their schoolwork, or obviously rural communities are affected by this. How is Verizon sort of exploring that issue and trying to attack it?
First of all, we have the widest network in the nation, and we have a surge of data, which is enormous. And we have 1,200% growth in the network when it comes to video conferencing since the pandemic broke out. We have almost 150% growth on gaming. We have 100% growth on downloads and streamings in the network. So it's just a totally shift when people are using it and what they're using. The network has performed better than ever. So I have no bottlenecks in the network where I have built it out. And of course, now I talk about wireless network, fiber network, and wireline networks in the whole nation. But of course, there are communities outside that, but there are fairly few of them, at least in our footprint. So I think that what we're going to see after this is, of course, how we can continue to deploy networks outside that grid and bring in all people in this nation. But one thing I have to say is that some of the things that I've been fighting for 15 years, that and I was part of the Ebola as well, but I was on the technology side with remote healthcare workers with a phone, and I was so clear that mobility, broadband, and cloud services are actually the 21st century's infrastructure to have everybody have an equal chance wherever they're born, wherever they come from. I think that now we have put finally a dent into those processes, that you don't need to go to hospital to get a good support from a pediatrician or whatever it might be. You don't need to do all the learning in the classroom. And that should open up, of course, a totally different world where basically a sustainable development can only be done within that type of infrastructure, and each and every on this world can have a more equal world. So I think it's coming some good with all this bad that we see right now, and finally we can take away some of the barriers that at least we in the Western world have had for so long. I mean, I'm born in Sweden, you know, a hospital is close, I go to the hospital and I want to sit there and wait. I think many people in the Western world will understand that we can deliver that service in a different way, education, and many other important services. So I think that's what I'm seeing as well. But again, when it comes to the network, clearly our network has held up well. We also, when the pandemic started, we decided to increase our capex for this year. We decided we invest more in the network as an insurance, because I didn't want to fail for my customers in these times. So I think I'm one of the few companies that increased the capex. So we went from we were between 17 to 18 billion US dollars a year to 17.5 to 18.5 billion US dollars a year. And we're still on the plan to do that, plan to execute and do the investment. And I think it was not only important because I want an insurance, I also wanted to send a message. We can invest right now. We have a responsibility for this country, and it's a lot of people being employed because of that. I have a lot of third parties rolling out my fiber, my 5G, but we continue with that. So it's a lot of thinking you need to do. And again, you come back to the why are you doing it and why are you here and how you support the communities.
Raj, Hans was just referring to some of the more systemic, long-lasting changes we might see after this, things like telehealth and distance learning that might linger for a while, if not forever. What, from your perspective, do you think will be some of the more long-lasting changes, perhaps both for the positive and for the negative?
Well, I agree with Hans very much. And I see, I think the positive changes will come in the acceleration of the digitization of the global economy. The amount of innovation, Hans obviously and Verizon are at the very forefront of that. But when you look across both how we work, the tools we have to define how we work, the coming analytic tools that will define our productivity in these new modes of working, are all going to be transformational for institutions, whether they are nonprofit foundations or civic action groups or large companies or small entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurial enterprises. So I think that's one big area of innovation that gets accelerated as a result of this. I think the second is biotechnology broadly. But right now, I mean, I've never seen the level of cooperation on vaccine development and immunotherapies, the level of cooperation on therapeutic investigation. I think we're not just going to see, maybe faster than some people have expected, some new therapeutics and potentially new tests, for example, but we're also coming up with new models of innovation throughout the biopharmaceutical industry. And I think that's going to be, and much more public-private there as well, and the foundations involved with some of those efforts. I think that'll be a long-term positive transformational trend. I worry about a couple of really deleterious ones. The first, and perhaps most important in the American economy, is I just think from a policy perspective, we are more proficient at supporting capital markets than we are supporting Main Street. And it was Larry Fink who said recently that, we've succeeded to large extent, it's stabilizing Wall Street, but our policy response has not stabilized Main Street. And if you look at, a 15% unemployment rate, millions and millions of new unemployment claims on a weekly basis, I suspect there's more long-term structural unemployment in the numbers, and some of the expectations that we're just going to snap back in a V-shaped recovery, even if that holds true for corporate profits and spending, the track record on employment and wages, since about the early 80s to today has been really, really bad. So, and most workers in America haven't had a raise in 40 years. And so while certain things have gotten less expensive, other things have gotten more expensive, technology's made their lives better, no one can argue with the underlying data. And so I worry that I thought it was powerful that it was one of the heads of American finance, global finance, that expressed the concern that the next decade could be even more unequal, even more defined by resentment, anger, and social strife caused by effectively bailing out Wall Street, but being ineffective at supporting real opportunity for working families in this country, the essential workers whom we celebrate on my block every evening at 7:00 by making some noise. So that's my biggest concern in the United States. My biggest concern globally is that emerging economies that have seen several decades of both sustained growth and real poverty reduction, and all of the good that comes with that, girls going to school, lights being turned on in communities, less sexual violence against women, all of that looks like it's going to rewind itself maybe a decade, in some places maybe 2 or 3 decades. And it's not just a pandemic crisis, but a global collapse in commodity prices and access to foreign exchange for these countries, coupled with the fact that they don't actually have the toolkit to make social distancing work. We support communities in slums in Nairobi in Kenya. Social distancing is not an option. Right now, they are crammed together and not getting access to food, and their country has a very low share of the economy that's even in the formal economy, and a low share of tax revenue collection, so almost no space to do the kind of stimulus you see in the industrial world. And I think the emerging economic disaster in lower income countries, unfortunately, won't be something people see and talk about, at first order, but will ultimately move back the gains for the world's most marginalized people by several decades. And that is a crisis that is of extraordinary consequence, and we should be doing everything we can to rethink our global institutions and whether we can support them in mustering a much more effective policy and fiscal and monetary response to just protect the 1 billion or 2 billion people who are at the bottom of the economic ladder on our planet.
Hans, I see you nodding. Did you want to add to that?
No, I agree. I mean, it's just sad and bad, in times of crisis like this, the vulnerables becomes more vulnerable. And I think what Raj is explaining is it's unfortunate. And the work that has been done the last 20 years of trying to make this planet a more equal place, equality for all, no poverty, and all of that, which has had progress, but we have not finished. And we had a good collection of corporations, countries rallying around the global goals. Of course, we're going to see some really tough years here, depending on how hard this hits on some of the countries that are not prepared to nor respond, as Rajan said, as well as not having the means to support their citizens. So yeah, that's a worry for me as well, because we haven't seen the end of this. This is a long journey of, and I usually say, one thing we need to understand, this is a crisis no one have ever seen before. I've been in the telecom crisis, I was in the banking crisis. You always knew that, or you're in a crisis of a natural disaster. Usually, more or less, it's going to end here, this is the remedies. Okay, you can do them better or worse. This is a crisis. You don't know the end stage of it. And that's, of course, concerning for a business leader, government, for a citizen, or whatever it is. And that's why we see the worry across the globe around this. And we have a lot of responsibility in large corporations, together with many others, to see that whatever we can do, we should do in this time. But clearly, that's a concern for me, that this can take us back years or maybe centuries from what we have progressed the last 20 years.
Well, that's a sobering reminder of why we need to be having this conversation and conversations like it, and also the urgency of it. Martin, I want to bring you back into this conversation as we start to close it out here, because you having sort of this big picture view of not just companies like Verizon, but others, do you think that this sort of wake-up call has been sufficient, that we will see long-lasting change and commitment to address some of the issues that Raj and Hans have been talking about today?
Well, I don't think we have a choice. I think our view is that, we have to come out of this with more people feeling like they have a stake in the economy, like it's working for them, not against them. This event has been fascinating because you've seen in the course of 45 minutes the interplay of the social, economic, health, environmental imperatives and the role of business and corporations. And that's what Just Capital is here to do. We are here to incentivize, inspire, and mobilize business leadership. Without that, I just don't think we're going to be able to create the kind of widespread prosperity that we need over the next several years, the kind of economic engine that we're going to need, and above all, the kind of humanity that we have to see in markets if we're really going to, create a future that's worth it. That gives enough people a sense that it's working for them, not against them. So that's sort of our mission in a microcosm, and I really appreciated both comments there. I do.
Please.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to thank Hans and Raj again, and Martin, I wanted to turn it back over to you as we close it out.
Great. I echo those thanks to both of you. A couple more word of thanks. First of all, to the Just Capital team. They're putting, thousands of hours in right now and building this tracker, the Just Capital COVID-19 platform, our overall rankings platform. I can't say enough about the team. It's been amazing to see. I do want to thank Ford Foundation as well. Ford's provided us with a $150,000 matching grant to continue this work right now. We're looking for donors to match that money right now. We think we want to hear from those folks who are listening to this and watching this, because this is a public utility, right? We're a nonprofit. We do this because we want users in business, in investment, in the investment markets, in advocacy, in nonprofit, in policy, to sort of empower folks with the data to try and drive change. And so, that's we want to hear from folks on the line. We want to hear from folks who are watching this to how what we're doing can provide more value. So I think that's just really important to say as well. And I do also want to thank Alan Fleischmann. Alan is a man of many parts. He is the CEO and founder of Laurel Strategies. He talks to leaders all around the world, and especially now his guidance to me personally, to Just Capital as a founding board member, and I'm sure to many others, has just been immense. Of course, that means that I text him and email him all hours of the night and day. So Alan's apologies for that, but thank you for your leadership right now. We all benefit from that. And of course, you're the architect of this event and our overall Just series. So thank you for that. So Alan, I want to turn it over to you and echo Julie's thanks lastly to Hans and to Raj.
Great. Thank you, Martin, big time. For Laurel Strategies, it's a joy to work with you, and obviously as a founding board member of Just Capital, I care a lot about, as you do, about taking Main Street, to Raj's point, and bringing it to Wall Street and making sure there's connectivity there. This has been an amazing session. Thank you, Julie, for pulling it all together here for us as well, and for Yahoo Finance. Hans and Raj are two unique leaders, and I guess during this pandemic, we are looking for heroes. These are two people that would never want the word hero even associated with them. But we are looking for people to speak up and leaders too. Hans is a pragmatic geek when it comes to technology who leads with a heart. And obviously Verizon is on the cutting edge of connecting us right now. And Raj, I would argue you're a guy who is in civil society, who's leading an organization with his heart as well. But you kind of look like a private sector guy in the way you approach things, and you're very pragmatic. The two of you have a lot in common. There's a reason why we brought you two as two CEOs together. I often talk about CEO statesmanship and how important it is right now in public life that CEOs come forward. It's actually the DNA of what Just Capital is about, is how do we empower CEOs as well to speak up and speak out in ways that frankly others don't, and lead. I don't think either one of you would ever imagine that even 2 months ago or 3 months ago you'd be challenged as you are, and certainly you're role models for other CEOs as well. The conversation isn't really about what we will do coming out of this, but what we should do. Because we know that stakeholder capitalism, or capitalism in general, is under threat. And we got to figure out a way to make this capitalism work for everybody. And it has to be, the way you, Hans, talk about, your employee first, and that you need your employees to feel the confidence in which they need to feel in order for them to be good for the customer. And that's part of your strategy. That's pragmatic, it's optimistic, it's empowering. Raj, you're figuring out, just like Hans is at Verizon, how you can put resources together for technology and actually take that technology and that data for good use and to share it with others. That's very much in the DNA of Just Capital as well. I think of both of you, and I hope that others that we will bring on this show and partner in partnership between Laurel Strategies and Just Capital going forward, we'll hear from you. You both are partnership. I would say that, Rockefeller Foundation at its DNA, maybe because you, Raj, was like that in your prior lives, is all about bringing people together and scale. I know that that's also what Hans is doing at Verizon. It's about partnering with community. It's about partnering with customers. It's about partnering with employees. So in this age of trying to figure out that head with the heart and the heart with the head, I would just love to challenge all of us. And I would certainly want us to challenge other CEOs to speak up in a way that actually, emulates what we're talking about here and emulates what you're doing. I would, as a proud board member of Just Capital, I wouldn't want to be remiss, and I want to reiterate what you said earlier, Julie. Please check out the work that Just Capital is doing. It can be found on our webpage, justcapital.com. If you're inspired by this conversation, please tune in to other convenings that we're going to do in building a just future. We're going to have a series of these conversations. We're going to try to bring people together that speak to the need and solve the challenges in the way that Hans is trying to do at Verizon every day, and what frankly what Raj is doing every day with the Rockefeller Foundation. Also, yahoofinance.com is a place to go if you want to see this program and you want to share it. So I guess in my last moment here, it's not just about partnership. I love the way, Raj, you bring, the global to the local, and the way, Hans, you bring the local to the global as well. You both are actors on the global stage. The Sustainable Development Goals are very important, and they're probably going to be relooked at right now because of the goal. The goals would probably need to be reaffirmed. But I would say that number nine is something that I know that, Hans, you were very much involved with the creation of, which is around building infrastructure, connectivity, technology, and using it for good. I know that's where you, Raj, has spent a lot of your time, both as the head of the USAID in the private sector and now as head of the Rockefeller Foundation. We got to figure out ways to use technology the way you do, in a way that we need to do, to connect vulnerable communities to Wall Street and to corporate America. So thank you on behalf of Just Capital, on behalf of Yahoo Finance, on behalf of Laurel Strategies, and certainly on behalf of Verizon. I would speak to you again, and then Rockefeller Foundation, that we can do more together. And you guys are great role models, leaving us humble and leaving us inspired. So thank you very much.